schedules.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If we could have everyone take their seats, we're going to begin. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but we're people of faith, so we will get to lunch on time. And we're delighted to have you here this morning. My name is Tom McDade Clay. I'm the Vice President for Institutional Advancement at Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School. And if you've been here throughout the week, you've probably heard that too many times, but we're delighted to hear you, or to have you here this morning. And we never grow tired of seeing you and having this conversation continue from yesterday. It was a rich, wonderful dialogue yesterday, and we know that we're looking forward to hearing from Dr. May and Jean Zeroux's words, as well as two of our panelists today as well, to keep this conversation going. Before we begin, I want to point out a couple of items for you. First of all, there's an excellent resource, Zionism Unsettled, that is prepared by the Presbyterian Church. It is unsettled, sorry.
It's not the Presbyterian Church. It's the Israel-Palestine Mission Network of the Presbyterian Church.
The Israel-Palestine Mission Network of the Presbyterian Church. You got that right?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a big
Absolutely.
difference.
We have a
Excellent resource nonetheless. Excellent resource nonetheless.
to the church, not for the church.
Okay, perfect. So this is available in our bookstore, and if we run out, which could very well happen, we can certainly order more. $10 is the price, so we encourage you to avail yourself of that excellent resource. Also, on the back table, you will see our save-the-date card for next fall. So we're already delighted to continue our discussion of Kairos. And our theme, again, if you were here yesterday, you know, is let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream for payment. So we encourage you to pick that up. If you're on our mailing list, you will get this as well. One of our new programs that we have beginning in the fall is our MA track in Kairos Studies. And so I would encourage you, either if you're interested or if you know of individuals who might be interested as well, to pick up one of these brochures and share that with them. It's a wonderful program. We're very excited about it, excited about the launch, and looking forward to being able to study and examine Kairos in a very specific way for this MA track. So I encourage you to pick that up. In May, we have our first inaugural Rochester Consortium of Theological Schools lecture, and our own president, Dr. Martin McNichol, will be offering his talk on shaping the claim. So we encourage you to pick up this flyer as well. That's on the back table. I am getting near the bottom of my pile. So. Also, we have 2 trips that are coming up, and we encourage you to think seriously about joining us on these trips. They are wonderful opportunities to study and engage in a very real and new way the topics that we're talking about here this week, and also the community that comes and develops from going on these trips is so lasting. The type of bonds that really carry forward with all that you do and the new friendships. So an excellent resource for all of you. Please consider seriously, again, yourself and sharing that word with others. Finally, this one you probably all recognize, there are envelopes on the back table. And even though this often is the point at which people, we joke about fundraising and money, but in reality, we can only do all of this with the generosity of you and others who make this possible. Speakers coming, the classes that we offer, our professors, this beautiful space that we're in, on this beautiful location, all of this takes resources and good stewardship. And so I ask you to not only think about yourselves and any ability that you have to support the school, but also to share this with others who aren't in the room, who would really get behind Colgate Rochester Crozier, the programs that we offer. We hold a very important space in the academy and in the church. And it's nothing that's magical. In other words, we can't turn around and act like it will always be there. It is here because people have intentionally supported it and will continue to support it. But if we back away from that responsibility, we can't just take for granted that CRCDS will be here just because it has been here. So I really strongly encourage you to consider seriously both either a gift now or a gift in the future, and to sharing that with other people. If you have any questions about that, I'm available certainly now and at any time to speak about that. I'm going to invite Dr. Stephanie Sauvé up now to give our formal introduction. Thank you.
Welcome to the second day of the Stuber Lectureship here at CRCDS and the final lecture of Lecture Week. This is the 30th anniversary of the Stanley I. Stuber Lectures, and we just want to celebrate the tireless work for human rights and activism and social justice that Reverend Stuber engaged in his ministry. His family shared with us that he spearheaded the effort for the 1 great hour sharing offering that is taken by many churches to respond to humanitarian relief at a time of disaster. Today, as you know, we have the words of Jean Saru, and our own Dr. Melanie Dugan-May will be presenting on Jean's behalf. And Melanie said, we just want to get to Jean. Don't say much about me. But I do want to say that Melanie came to us to be the first dean of the Women and Gender Studies program here at CRCDS over 20 years ago. And Melanie, yes, that should be clapped. And Melanie, through her contacts nationally and internationally, has brought the conversation to the fore of women's voices not being silenced in the pulpit, in community, and even in politics. Hopefully, God, someday in the presidency of this country. It has been her tireless work for the voice of women and the justice for women that has really become part of who we are here at CRCDS and a core value of what we believe is our work for justice, for voices of all people. Melanie will teach the first class in Kairos Studies for us this next fall. It's entitled Kairos, Call to Repentance, Cry of Hope. So I welcome to the podium my colleague, my friend, my mentor, Melanie Dugan-May, the John Price Crozier Professor of Theology.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, dear friend, colleague. I am going to introduce Jean in slightly more abbreviated form than I did yesterday, but still fully, so that we invite her presence among us in anticipation of the second lecture she prepared for us. Jean is a Palestinian Christian woman, each word being significant. She's a Quaker who for many years has served as presiding clerk of the historic Ramallah Friends meeting and helped create there the Friends International Center devoted to creating a culture of nonviolence and peace. Jean is also a founding member and leader in the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Center in Jerusalem. Her witness in word and deed is wrung from the daily reality of life under Israeli military occupation, fired by her passion for seeing God in each person, never losing sight of the enemy as neighbor. Into what we heard our preacher of the morning remind us. Never lose sight of the enemy as neighbor and potential friend. Jean speaks as a Christian, conscious that this voice, the voice of Palestinian Christians, is not much heard in Western media, and that many of us, have been led to believe the shrinking Christian population in Israel-Palestine is because of discrimination at the hands of Muslims. Jean herself understands the Muslim and Christian Palestinians to be one people, and she affirms many of the values and beliefs of the Islamic faith as very akin to those of the Christian faith. Jean speaks as a woman, very conscious of how women have been discriminated against in her culture and religion, as in many cultures and religions. Jean speaks perhaps most profoundly from within the Palestinian story. It's the story of her own life and the story of her extended family. Born into the Michael family, one of the 7 clans who originally inhabited Ramallah, Jean's earliest memories as a child are of Palestinian refugees coming up to the hills from the coastal villages and their lands and homes in 1948 during the Palestinian Nakba, or catastrophe, or deliberate displacement of Palestinian people by Israel at its founding. A displacement that continues in the ways we also heard our preacher of the morning detail in his sermon. Jean has pointed out to me the trees under which those refugees gathered for shelter, and has told me the stories of how her family welcomed many of these uprooted Palestinians into their own home and gardens. After her marriage to Fuad Zaru, principal of the Friends School in Ramallah, Jean taught 4th and 5th grade boys there and high school girls for 18 years. During these years, she developed an ethics curriculum to give students skills for building community, embracing differences of gender, ideology, race, and religion, even as these were students who lived under strict curfew and faced repeated interrogation by Israeli military for nonviolent protest against occupation. Jean's reality now is of the ghettoization of Palestinian life, defined by checkpoints and travel permits and the wall, punctuated by watchtowers stretching across the landscape. Leaving Ramallah to go to meetings or get medical care is all but impossible for Jean after Jerusalem was closed to Palestinians without a Jerusalem identity card. When Jean joined the CRCDS pilgrimage group last June 19th, 2013, as we walked through the Via Dolorosa, through the narrow streets of the Old City, it was her first time in Jerusalem, a mere 12 miles from her home, since the closure in 1993, 20 years. Even as it has become more difficult for her to travel from Ramallah through the checkpoints across the King Hussein Bridge on the River Jordan to Amman, since she's forbidden to fly from the nearby Tel Aviv airport. During the last nearly 40 years, Jean has been steadfast in her witness, courageous in her witness, which has taken her to Europe, to the United States, and around the world. I could detail all the places that she has taught, that she has spoke, where her presence has itself been a witness. I met her in 1983 at a Women, Religion, and Social Change conference at Harvard University when I was a graduate student. Our friendship has been sustained through the years by letters and visits, now emails, and Magic Jack facilitated phone calls. During my 2007 sabbatical that I spent at the Tantor Ecumenical Institute in Jerusalem, I often took the bus cross checkpoints to visit Jean in her home in Ramallah. Her Palestinian cooking is without peer. Her tell it like it is wisdom was and is my reality check. Her spiritual sensitivity is the stuff of her daily living. As she explained to me why she had fewer plants than when I last visited, she said, "It would not be right for me to use the water for plants that my neighbors in nearby refugee camps need for drinking." Her sense of humor wells up from her depths. Her rapier wit is simply delightful. The dignity with which she presents herself in the world is itself a testimony to the human dignity for all persons, to which she is so passionately committed. Jean is not with us in body, but she assured me in an email yesterday morning that she is with us in mind and in spirit in Amman, where she had traveled on her way here to receive medical care she has long needed but been unable to get in Ramallah or to access in Jerusalem, since she does not and could not get a travel permit to go there. Her absence, therefore, is not for medical reasons alone. Her absence is a matter of sustained and structural injustice, perpetuated by the military occupation that affects and disrupts every aspect of Palestinian lives. Jean wrote also in her email that she hopes to return to Ramallah on Sunday, recrossing the King Hussein Bridge over the River Jordan. She says she's already humming the tune, I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Angels coming to carry me home. Yesterday morning, confronting the structures of domination, we heard Jean's wise, courageous insights into the structure of domination and heard her testimony as she makes her witness. This morning, she has prepared some slides, some PowerPoint slides, which present to us the multiple structures of violence that she and other Palestinians fight on multiple fronts. Yes, those are the and so we'll move through those, and then she has prepared a brief, almost meditation on Palestinian ways of making peace and granting forgiveness. So that's how we'll end, and then open it for questions, including the contributions of my esteemed colleagues on the panel. So, Todd, what she begins with is what is familiar to some of us, 1946. These are the Jewish settlement areas in white. Many of the Jewish the modern Jewish immigration began in the 1880s, mostly, as you see, on the coast, around the Sea of Galilee. The partition plan that was passed by the United Nations to settle the conflict, and you see the proportions. I'm suddenly blanking out on the percentages of the 47 partition.
I think it was about 60-40, 58.
Yeah, it was 58, 40, say, yeah, 60-40 is easier to remember. So the proposal was that in by decree, we move from this to this. It's small wonder that Palestinians did not accept the partition plan. The war of 1948, the Nakba for the Palestinians, the War of Independence for the Israelis, broke out. This was 49 to 67. And so when people talk about the Green Line, this is where it ran, around the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. This became the State of Israel. This is 2000. You see that not only has the areas of the West Bank that are now white are the settlements built by the Israelis since the 1967 war in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. And you see that even the Gaza Strip has been diminished. If we were to have a slide from 2014, there would be even less green on the map as the settlement building has accelerated in the years since that slide. This is some detail, and here what is particularly important to look at are two things. One is this red line is the line of the separation wall, which some people, including Israelis, have called the apartheid wall. I cannot help but add here, it is not unlike the wall we are building on the U.S.-Mexico border. And some of the technology we have taken, we have swapped techniques. So, but you see the red line running, jutting into, departing from the 67 borders, and encircling the large settlements on the West Bank. This is Ariel, for example, and you see it cuts in half the West Bank. So when I speak of ghettoization, it's very difficult to go from the northern West Bank to the southern West Bank. Very difficult to go from Ramallah to Bethlehem unless you go back roads Palestinians know. And you see around Jerusalem, this is the Jerusalem envelope that is being built, the closure, 1993. In April, before the signing of the Oslo Accords in September, Jerusalem was closed. That was supposed to be a final status issue for negotiation. Jerusalem was closed, and big settlements. This is Ma'ale Adumim, around Bethlehem, or Homa, Gush Etzion blocks, and around Hebron, Kiryat Arba settlements. So you can see that the wall is being used for the de facto annexation of land on which settlements are built. And the other thing to point out, these lines are the roads that are settler-only roads that cut through Palestinian land, but which Palestinians themselves may not use. Okay, Todd. I'm not sure where to see that here. What Jean has prepared for us now is a series of slides which describe the Israelis use the term facts on the ground. In another context, they use that term. But let's take their term and use it differently. These are this is Jean's description of the facts on the ground. This is the daily life of Palestinians. This is her accounting of strategies Palestinians are using to resist and to overcome. Okay? And so we'll have a series of slides now. Direct violence. Killings, these include targeted civilian, political assassinations, torture, closures, siege, use of civilians as human shields, imprisonment without charge or trial, is administrative detention for 90 days, kind of like in apartheid South Africa. Only there it was 3 months. It was longer, I think. Expulsions, house demolitions, domestic violence. The strategies, building multiple nonviolent strategies for resistance, confidence building. This includes the World Council of Churches Ecumenical Accompaniment Program, International Solidarity Movement. Rachel Corrie was, some of you may know, a young woman from Washington State who was killed by a bulldozer, was part of the ISM. There's also Christian peacemakers, peacemaking teams, nonviolence training and demonstrations. The Palestinians take all of this very seriously. Expose and delegitimize the violence of the powerful in the state. So bringing into light state terrorism. Advocate ban on arms sale and production. Advocate human rights, international law, morally responsible investment, economic boycott. We mentioned yesterday, BDS, boycott, divestment, sanction, which is our third. Economic and structural violence. Restrictions on movement and trade by Israel. Roadblocks, closure, control of roads, house curfew. This has really decimated the Palestinian economy, both in the West Bank and especially the exports, significant agricultural exports from the Gaza Strip. Unemployment and impoverishment, of course, following. Economic marginalization, exclusion, exploitation of water, land, and people's work. The placement of the settlements, for example, has been very strategically aligned with water aquifers on the West Bank. The Israelis control the water under Palestinian land and use, I forget how many times more water than Palestinians. Destruction of civil society and infrastructure, no protection or recourse. Overcoming, advocate economic rights, water rights, land rights, ecological sustainability. Palestinians take very seriously local, sustainable, organic agriculture. They know how to do it very well. It's an indigenous knowledge that most of us, don't have anymore. Create jobs, fair trade, right sharing of resources. You heard me talk about Jean's sensibility, sharing her water. Okay. Political structural violence, military occupation settlements, denial of self-determination, sovereignty, right of return. Nations, this was a principle that came to the fore after World War I. Our very own Woodrow Wilson articulated the right of people to self-determination. But that didn't happen in the Middle East. Colonial powers at that point had already sliced it up well before the war was over. So, closures, siege. We know the siege of Gaza. There was a siege of the West Bank in 2002. The wall, fragmentation. We've seen that on the map. Advocate political rights according to international law, UN resolutions. Advocate human, water, land rights. Advocate for self-determination. Cultural and structural violence. Stereotyping of Palestinians, Arabs, women in the media, women in education and in language. We all know too much about this, how Arabs, Muslims, Palestinians are portrayed in Western media. Discrimination of women. Imposition of other cultures and their value systems. Patriarchal culture. Western culture. Authoritarianism, glorification of military, violence of the state, and direct violence. We heard a bit yesterday about the military culture, the militarization of Israeli society. We could talk also about the militarization of our own woods. Destruction, shelling of cultural heritage sites, both archaeological and architectural. Strategies for overcoming, media educational strategies, building on authentic witness, dialogue, encounter. And encounter includes alternative tourism or pilgrimages. The Kairos Palestine 2009 statement ends with, come and see. Come and see. Participation in decision-making, learning about Palestinian history and heritage. And this is being worked on also in Bethlehem at a new Dar al-Khalima College and University. Mitri Rahib, the Lutheran pastor of the Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem, to teach Palestinian youth about their history and their culture so they don't forget the story of the way. And teaching their dance, their music, giving expression in poetry, painting. I think this is fine. Religious structural violence, language. Jean points out a number of theological concepts and theological words which we use thoughtlessly, carelessly. First and foremost among them is the whole notion of chosenness. And we can talk more about that. Disunity among the churches. The churches of the Middle East have been notoriously divided through the years. And in one sense, they're coming together at the time of the First Intifada, 1987-88, was a marked turning point when all the heads of Jerusalem churches could come together and issue a common statement about the Intifada. Yeah, there is one. So the ability of Palestinian Christian leaders to speak together. This unity, if you go to the Holy Sepulchre, is still Christian Zionism, Palestinian theological of Christian Zionism, who come and so overcoming religious structural violence, exposed to the political chauvinism of the fundamentalist movements and their stand against women, as well as their religious and political exclusivity. Contextual liberation theology based on nonviolence. That's the work of the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Center. Work for ecumenism and unity. There is now an ecumenical circle of friends among the Christian churches in Jerusalem that is dedicated to that work, for example. And there's a similar organization in the Galilee. Dissociate themselves from fundamentalism. Education on Islam among Christians. I have a dear friend who's a white father living in St. Anne's. That's his work. That's been his work for many years. Dialogue between Muslims and Christians. Alternative pilgrimages. Come and see. Visit the living stones. Worship the living stones. Oh, there's one more. I'm sorry. Environmental. How could I forget? The earth. The earth. The land to which the Palestinians belong, as they say. Confiscation, destruction of agricultural land. Uprooting of trees, thousands of olive trees, which are members of Palestinians' families for generations. Pirating and diversion of water resources. I mentioned that in terms of the settlement pattern. Restrictions on water well, drilling and water capture. So even the attempt to have water tanks is subject to restriction. Dumping of solid and toxic waste in occupied territories. Most settlements do not treat their sewage. It goes directly as raw sewage onto Palestinian agricultural land. Settlement sewage villages onto village land, sorry. Restrictions on movement prevent farmers' access to their lands and settler violence to crops and livestock. So, for example, some of the ecumenical accompaniers sent by the World Council of Churches live in villages simply to accompany shepherds with their sheep to graze. Damaged infrastructure leads to public health problems such as no clean water, no refrigeration, vaccines, medical care. It's very difficult to get. And as you heard, travel to obtain medical care is very difficult. Overcoming adherence to international environmental conventions and protocols, the Convention on Combating Desertification, Convention of Conservation of Biodiversity, Code of Kyoto Protocol, adherence to Geneva Conventions, which call for protection of natural resources in occupied territories, observance of international human rights standards, which call for clean water and sanitation, support international environmental organizations working in the occupied territories, eco-friendly tourism, supporting green campaigns in the occupied territories. That includes, as I said, local sustainable organic agriculture, recycle, reuse, reduce. So these are Jean's facts on the ground, the structural violence, and her strategies. The strategies being used by the Palestinian people for decades to overcome them. And now her closing words to us. She says, keeping this structural violence in mind, I would like to share with you the Palestinian and Arab way of making peace and granting forgiveness. Sulha. Sulha. If my neighbor or any other member of the community violates my dignity in any way, or has taken my land, injured my family members, and so on, before Sulha can begin, the person who has wronged me chooses a mediator, who is a well-respected person known for his or her values of justice and reconciliation. There is then a 6-step process. The first, community participation and reconciliation. A date is set to visit me in my home in the presence of my extended family members. Step 2, humility and reconciliation. The person who wronged me will come with the mediator and his or her extended family members. Third step, the person who has wronged me recognizes the hurt that is done. Then a commitment is made to repair the damage, and forgiveness is asked. That third step, truth and reconciliation. Fourth step, justice and reconciliation. The mediator takes responsibility for executing the repairing of that damage. The fifth step, forgiveness and reconciliation. Then forgiveness is given by saying, you are in our home, you are one of us, and we take it upon ourselves to help and protect the person who has done us wrong. It is then proclaimed, forgiveness is a gift from God. The 6th step, communion and reconciliation. All share in eating together, breaking bread together, which is a commitment of fellowship and sharing rather than enmity and exploitation. This traditional way of making peace and reconciliation respects and restores the dignity of both parties. But it must be remembered that when it comes to the peace process with Israel, peace cannot be the end, but thus must be the means. For as the great Dr. Martin Luther King said, hate cannot drive out hate. And there cannot be peace without justice. For Palestinians, peace has become an empty word, merely symbolizing the surrender of our rights. This surrender has been the basis of all peace talks, and has also been the reason that they did not bear fruit. But peaceful resistance is working. A successful movement called Boycott, Sanctions, Divestment, BDS, inspired by the peaceful tactics of fighting South African apartheid, have been making waves as companies, universities, organizations, and countries have been putting economic pressure on the Israeli government by boycotting Israeli products made using land or resources illegally obtained, often made in Israeli settlements that are illegal under international law. From this, we learn that peace as a means is more powerful than violence. Friends, I cannot emphasize enough that in my humble experience, I have found that the peculiar strength of nonviolence comes from the dual nature of its approach. The offering of respect and concern on one hand, while meeting injustice with non-cooperation and defiance on the other. These are seemingly contradictory impulses to rage against while simultaneously refusing to destroy. But together they create a force worthy of nothing less than a revolution. By this I mean not just a reshuffling of death-dealing powers, but a genuine restructuring of the society in which we live. We have been led to work for peace while much stands in the way. These issues are clear, and the dangers are very obvious. Peace is for everyone, not just the powerful, but we cannot have peace if we continue to recite our litanies of past wrongs and past fears. We must deal with the present. We must look to the future for our children and all humanity. We must build with new materials that will not produce future wars. It is up to us to remove the causes of war. But we do not seem to realize this. Many of us are indifferent to some extent as we go about our daily lives, thinking we are not important enough to have an impact, or that we're too busy with other things. Yet working for peace is the obligation of us all. Peace consists of dealing creatively with the inevitable internal, interpersonal, intergroup, and international conflict that is part of human life. I have learned that the struggle for justice is one struggle, and that an action taken to subvert violence and strengthen human rights in one place is an action on behalf of people everywhere. I now understand that our global responsibilities and relationships have a local face, and no matter where we live, we can work for human rights and a culture of nonviolence. The kinships we form as we do serve as a prototype of the new community that knows no national, racial, gender, sexual boundaries. Throughout the ages, people have engaged in a universal search for meaning in life, but have too often turned this search into a struggle for a particular ideology or religion or nation. Our age of unparalleled advancement in education, science, and technology has also been an age of enormous violence. The need for imaginative understanding, simple trust, creative cooperation has never been more urgent. Maybe the time has come when we should unite in common affirmations of life, and these might be a pledge of honor and respect for every race, culture, religion, and individual. A recognition of the claim of every individual upon the resources of the earth for the necessities of human life, and the moral obligation of the more fortunate to share with the less fortunate. The right and opportunity, the right and responsibility of every individual to use their talents, energies, and resources for the benefit of the community. the commitment to the search for universal values, however differently expressed, in hopes that these values may enable both the individual and the community to overcome greed, power, and self-seeking. The affirmation of presence, the presence of a spirit of hope and compassion available to all, by which our lives may be made more whole, more creative, more harmonious, as we draw directly upon that power around us and within us and within all life. We must not give up. For to give up is to give in to the structures of violence that attempt to delegitimize us, redefine us, and kill our will as humans to resist. We must continue to flame those embers of light, no matter how small they are, because these embers of light give hope. Give hope to those in the forefront of the struggle, and keep the work for justice, peace, and transformation in the Middle East alive. So I think we have some time now for interaction. I don't know, colleagues, Mark?
I think we're going to ask that Dr. Wright and Dr. Braverman respond, and then we're going to send you forth with your questions, because we all need to struggle, and we all need to find ways to engage our questions in our own journey, and to continue to live with the struggle and the longing and the yearning that wells up in us when we question. And so we'll leave you with the words of our colleagues.
A response. Well, I have a one-word response, which is wow. And listening to Jean's words and looking at the slides and the words on the screen and sort of scribbling furiously and dealing with my own sort of welling up and the questions that come. I miss Jean very much right now because, oh my God, would I love to ask her some questions.
Yes.
One question that came to me about midway through, and then I think she answered, but we need to talk more about it, is, okay, Jean, you're talking about sulh, you're talking about a process of mediation and reconciliation and coming together and sitting at a table. Yes, and of course it has to happen. But where is the table? And where is the one home that we can come and sit in together? It ain't there. There is a wall instead. In terms of the parties that need to come together to create a society together.
Could you lower your mic,
Okay.
please?
Turn the other one.
Try that. So, listening again to Jean's words, to a point that I find myself making all the time, and it's becoming more and more true, is that for us here, there are two things that we need to do. We need to support nonviolent resistance. We need to support BDS. That's more and more and more true. There is no alternative, I think, for us. Now, BDS is a big tent. There's a lot of things to do, but now that finally, and I said this yesterday in the sermon, I said, praise God that the quote peace process is over, we can open up to the new thing. And the new thing is what Jean is talking about. It's nonviolent resistance. It's our, she says, it's our responsibility. She used that word. This is our fight. This is our struggle. This is the defining issue of our times. And it's not because Palestinian suffering is the worst suffering in the world. By far, it is not. You know, I stood in a refugee camp 40 miles outside of Khartoum, Sudan. You see suffering there that makes the Haitian camp look like Beverly Hills. That's not the issue. The issue is that this is, as Jean says, it's a global struggle. When you unpack Palestine, you unpack the whole thing. So it's our struggle, and it's the defining issue of our day for all kinds of reasons. And BDS means a lot of things that we can do as individuals, as churches, as campuses, and as academic institutions, as communities, as congregations. And we need to do that. We need to speak to our government and advocate for a change in policy. And the more we boycott and the more we divest, that changes the political wind. And then they start to listen. They don't listen until they see that there is a swelling up, a welling up of a movement at the grassroots. So when people say, well, we can't boycott Israel, it won't work, or whatever, and I say, well, what words in Montgomery Bus boycott do you not understand? It's another reason why this fellow back here, and all the talking we've been doing about life. Yes, we need to get to that table, but how do we get there? I would challenge her, I would ask her, not a test question, but maybe a trouble we can sit at that table, and I would love to know what she would say. And I often use the analogy, I say, well, you know, what would a truth and reconciliation process in South Africa have been? Well, apartheid was still in force. You know, it's after. So, you know, if the genocide is still happening in Rwanda, you know, sit together and talk about what happened. So, but that there may be other answers. I mean, the second point, we have to do BDS. The other thing we have to do while this horror exists of apartheid in our time, is to support civil society in Palestine and in Jewish Israel as well. And she enumerates that. It's right there on the slides. You know, send the ecumenical companies to stand with Palestinians. Work with NGOs in Tel Aviv as well as in Ramallah and in Bethlehem and in Nablus. And just let them know that we are here with them. Establish those partnerships. Who are our partners over there? And how do we do that? Because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know whether we're looking at apartheid until we get to the other side. And we have that communal table that Gene is talking about, and I know that it will come. Until then, so we have to find the ways to do that. Again, as individuals, families, campuses, institutions, congregations, denominations.
One of the most powerful and very important for us, and almost have half an answer on behalf of Gene to your question, or half an answer, is her ability to, and the importance of putting a human face on the issue and on the issues. One of the worshipers this morning leaving the chapel said to me, and that's true in our churches, and it was true going back days ago, as I said yesterday, to the South African struggle. Until we got to put human faces on the issue, all we saw was what the media was showing us. And one of the things, the violence in Chicago. Now, Chicago has around 3 million residents and about 100,000 gang members. So you take the terrorist bombings and make that the Palestinian people, like you're going to take the extra disciples and make that the city of Chicago. You're taking a few of us and labeling all of us with one broad brushstroke, which is what the media is good at. So that's the point in terms of the media. Pastor, a document that Bill just shared with me. Anybody watch Channel 10 last night? Channel 10 didn't say anything at all about what I said. Morgan John McCool, Helen Satoli, I mentioned Satoli last night. These are South Africans who were in Chicago, members of the church. When our members of the church got to talk to, put a face on, these are the terrorists that the media is showing you, and their story is just talking to Palestinian Jews, talking to Palestinian Christians, putting a face on the issue changes it. And here's why I suggest that while we do BD, I'm not saying please don't misunderstand, but we need to do BDS as Gene says. We need to do that. And with my Presbyterian sister, thank you for pointing out that book that you put together Presbyterians, I mentioned it yesterday, they get ready for a big fight at the General Assembly over that bill. That we do need to do BDS, but simultaneously, I said we can come to the table like they did in Northern Ireland and like they did in some places in South Africa in terms of before, you're right, with apartheid still, the legal structure of the country, having a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is not going to work, but small comings to the table of I went to Northern Ireland against my will. Way back, some of you will remember in the 80s when there were riots in Brixton. Minister Farrakhan went to London because there are 8 or 10 different Nation of Islam mosques in the UK, and he went to try to calm down the fighting and put down on the violence, and Her Majesty would not let him off the plane in Heathrow because she thought his very presence would spark trouble. Well, the religious community, she did not expect this, the religious community of African Americans in the country, Christians, Jews and Muslims, rose up in disbelief that she would not let the man off the plane. To show she was not against black clergy, she then offered free trips to black clergy to the United Kingdom. And I was called to ask would I like to go on board. And I said if I could see what I want to see and not just a dog and pony show, I know she's going to show me. They said, yes, and we'll give us your list. I gave them my list, and they took my list and everything on my list and combined it with her list. And I spent 2 weeks free in the United Kingdom. All the whiskey you could drink, all the food you could eat, free. When we got to the schedule, I noticed that there were 4.5 days in Northern Ireland. And I said, wait a minute, why Northern Ireland? Well, the British consider that a part of the United Kingdom. But they wanted me to sit and talk with church people in Belfast and members of congregations, both Catholic and Presbyterian, to see what the real deal was, not what the media. The media shows the bombings in Belfast. They don't show you the ordinary people where Presbyterian kids and Catholic kids are playing together in the same block. They don't show you that. Once you get to put a face on the thing and see how human beings are relating and struggling, the political stuff is still going on, but human beings have lives. Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Jews, Palestinian Muslims have lives and life together at the table. I think is one way of working on that, on Sulah, and working on getting at a groundswell, grassroots, where the people themselves say to the governments, this is enough. No. It was putting a face to the South African struggle that got our congregation. And I found out that the congregations that would not help, that had no face. All they knew, that they're terrorists, they're communists, you know. I saw it on CBS. That's what the media says. Have you talked to any of the people? Do you know what's going on? I think that, in fact, I'll show you this one. On her slide, presentation, restrictions on movement and farmers' access to their lands. Again, another face, not a member of our church, another face on the issue blew my mind. I was in Arlington, Virginia, preaching a revival with Leonard Smith, and he took me to dinner after service at 9:30 at night in Arlington, Virginia. Well, I like soul food. There's no possibility of getting any soul food in Arlington, Virginia at 9:30 at night. So he took me to one of those shishi-poo-poo places with Chris. And we were the only other, there was one couple about with back door was sitting in the restaurant. When we got there at 9:30, the kitchen closed at 10 o'clock. And the guy brings out, those of you who have never been to Ruth Chris, he brings out a tray full of steaks, and you get to pick your raw steak off this tray. I don't know, steak at 9:30 at night. The other pastor who was a guest with us, he wasn't really hungry, so I asked the waiter, can we split a steak? He said, certainly. So we'll take which one you want. This is good, we'll split this one. How about potatoes? I said, well, I want bacon. He wanted fries. I said, can we do that? He said, no problem. Now the salads, I said, you ever seen these salads? These are huge salads, Ruth Chris salads. Can we split a salad? He said, sure. Then he took our host pastor's order, and he came back to the table. He said to me, Reverend Wright, do you want your salad before your meal or with your meal? I said, I'll take mine before. How about you? Hammond said, I'll take mine before also. Now this was in 2004. I don't think Barack had been elected to the Senate yet. So there was no national fury. There was no media frenzy. My name was not in the press. The guy walked away, the waiter, and I said to the host, did you tell him my name? Does he know about the revival? He looked Middle Eastern. He said, no. I said, well, how does he know my name? I don't know. He hadn't been there that couple. I don't think they know me. Why don't you ask? I will ask. And he came back, brought the salads back. I looked at his name tag, M-A-L-I-K. I said, Malik, how do you know my name? He said, Pastor Wright, I am Palestinian. Everybody in my village knows your name. He said, that wall that I heard you preach about has run right down through my father's property. Restriction. He cannot get to his own olive orchards on the other side of the wall. Please don't stop preaching and telling the truth about what's going on and what's happening to my people. He not only paid me a compliment, he paid for my meal.
I just want to add two quick comments. One is there are places where the table is being set, and we need to look for those places. I think of the parent circle, Palestinians, Israeli Jews who have lost children coming together in their grief. One example of a table being set. There are other examples of people finding a way around and over and through the wall, which is there precisely so there is no place for meeting. So there are things happening, and I just invite, it is a challenge, but I invite people to be cognizant. The other thing to be said is, where are we setting the tables here in Rochester? And so that's where it comes to us and our responsibility right here. Because what happens, and Jean said this so well, what happens locally is global. What happens globally is local. And we can't forget that. And so the question that comes to us is, what are we doing here in Rochester to set the tables of reconciliation that Jean so eloquently described in the process of sort of Mark Lent's The Last Minute.
Last word. Yes, thank you, that was kind. Just a personal thing. Often, especially on a Sunday morning after preaching from the lectionary, people will come to me afterwards and say, when did you convert? And I would say, I don't know what that means, but I wish that things had gone differently in the first century so I wouldn't have to be answering that question. I think we have an opportunity to bring people back together again around what Jesus was really about, and the tragedy of the first century, in some sense, the tragedy that was set up for the church early on was the split between the Jews at the time and the followers of Jesus, who never intended for everybody to go up and start a new religion or whatever. I'm heartened by both of your words about the table that Jean wants us to set. And of course, we have to set that table. And we just set the table with the folks over there. And we have to set a new table here. After World War II, after the near destruction of European Jewry, there was a table set between Jews and Christians that needed to be set. Here's the challenge for us today. As we set this new table, and there will be Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and people of all different kinds sitting at that table, there will be people who will say, no, we will not join you at this table. You are heretics, you are breaking the rules, you are not following the law, and we're the experts. And it will be Jews from the Jewish institutions, and there will be many Christians from the churches and the denominations saying, we are the experts. You may not set that table. We need to stay at the table that we are at. And so this I think will be our challenge, and I feel like I always need to keep having to name the elephant in the room, because if we are going to move forward, there is a price that people will try to exact from us, and we have to be faithful. We have to be faithful about that. And I just keep coming back to what Jesus said. I think it was in Luke what he said. Matthew talks about the sword, and Luke talks about division. He says, if we're going to have peace, and come not to bring peace, but rather, and then there's a word that you can't translate very well, but it means taking a stand, getting off the fence, and as Jesus would always tell us, there is a price to pay. You have to walk away from something in order to walk into the future. And this one is not easy to walk away from, especially for Christians who carry such a burden of Christian guilt. I had a conversation briefly with somebody yesterday after the lecture. And I said, well, I realized that what's difficult for Christians when they're confronted with being called anti-Semites, or betraying Jewish-Christian reconciliation, is that you've got to tolerate your own feelings of somebody saying, you're not being a good friend to me. You're betraying our friendship. And what you got to remember at that point is that, at that point, you got to deal with your own feelings. It's your problem. Okay? What God wants and what your conscience wants is what you've got to put in front of you. You've got to tolerate the feelings of discomfort that will come when you leave one table that you love and join another table that calls to you.
So again, I want to thank our esteemed colleagues here at the table, my colleague Melanie May, and our consultant for this week, Mark Braverman, and our African American Legacy speaker and preacher of the day, Dr. Wright. And I want to thank all of you for being here as well. And I would ask that you would please fill out your evaluation form to assist us in continuing to improve our time together. I would say to you that Asuda is outlined in Jean's book, which is for sale in our bookstore. And I would boldly like to give Jean the last word when I asked her about that process when I was with our group in June of 13. She said to me, Stephanie, set the table at your own house and become proficient in the practice before you think you can bring it into the world. And so I invite us all to set that table in our lives as I send us forth to the lunch table this day. Have a good day. God bless.